Why does God delay dealing with evil? We'll talk about that and other points in this section of Exodus. We are reading the books of the law on Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan. And today we're going to be reading Exodus 8:19 through Exodus 9:16. I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we will discuss. Wait, what was it? I lost where I was. 8:19, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, through 9:16. Okay. So, and I shall set a ransom between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign will be. And thus the Lord did, and a heavy horde came into the house of Pharaoh and the house of his servants, and in all the land of Egypt the land was ravaged in the face of the horde. And Pharaoh called to Moses and to Aaron and said, Go, sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses said, It is not right to do thus, for the abomination of Egypt we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God. If we sacrifice the abomination of Egypt before their eyes, will they not stone us? A 3 days' journey into the wilderness we shall go, and we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God as he has said to us. And Pharaoh said, I myself will send you off, that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only you must not go far away. Entreat on my behalf. And Moses said, Look, I am going out from your presence, and I shall entreat the Lord that the horde may turn away from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh continue to mock by not sending the people off to sacrifice to the Lord. And Moses went off from Pharaoh's presence and entreated the Lord. And the Lord did according to Moses' word, and the horde turned away from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people, not one remained. And Pharaoh hardened his heart this time too, and he did not set off the people. And the Lord said to Moses, Come into Pharaoh, and you shall speak to him. Thus said the Lord, God of the Hebrews, Send off my people that they may worship me. But if you refuse to send them off, and you still hold on to them, look, the hand of the Lord is about to be against your livestock which is in the field, against the horses, against the donkeys, against the camels, against the cattle, and against the sheep, a very heavy pestilence. And the Lord will set apart the livestock of Israel from the livestock of Egypt, and nothing of the Israelites will die. And the Lord set a fixed time, saying, Tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. And the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died, but of the livestock of Israel not one died. And Pharaoh said, And look, not a single one had died of the livestock of Israel. And Pharaoh's heart hardened, and he did not send off the people. And the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, Take your handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw it towards the heaven before Pharaoh's eyes, and it shall become a fine dust over all the lands of Egypt, and it shall become on man and on beast a burning rash, erupting in boils in all the land of Egypt. And they took the soot from the kiln and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses threw it toward the heavens, and it became a burning rash with boils erupting on man and on beast. And the soothsayers could not stand before Moses because of the burning rash, for the burning rash was on the soothsayers and in all of Egypt. And the Lord toughened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. And the Lord said to Moses, Rise early in the morning, and station yourself before Pharaoh, and you shall say to him, Thus said the Lord, God of the Hebrews, Send off my people, that they may worship me. For this time I am about to send all my scourges to your heart, and against your servants, and against your people, so that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. For by now I could have sent forth my hand, and I could have struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been wiped off the face of this earth. And yet, for this I have let you stand, so as to show you my power, and so that my name will be told through all the earth. Okay. So that is the end of that dramatic section. It is escalating very quickly. We have another 2 plagues mentioned here. We actually, well, 3, because we have the horde, right? And then Pharaoh calls to Moses and Aaron, and he said, Sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses says, We can't, because it would be an abomination. So I'm guessing whatever it is that they wanted to do was something the Egyptians did not like. Was it like a sacred cow sort of thing?
Yeah, either the animals they would sacrifice would have been a problem to the Egyptians, or perhaps the methodology. I've seen comments on both aspects.
Yeah, because they had their own customs, right? And so maybe perhaps a certain method of sacrificing or something like that.
Or what they were going to sacrifice.
Right. And obviously that wasn't what God asked for in the first place. He asked for them to do it in a separate place. He wanted that division.
Right.
Because to do a sacrifice in such a pagan plays. That's not what he wanted.
So Moses now gives, not just because God said so, he actually gives him a rational explanation.
Yeah, it's true.
Or or what rational to Pharaoh.
Yeah. However, keeping with Moses' pattern, it does not actually work. This conversation does not work. Now, granted, it's not his fault, but right. He once again does not seem to get what he needs by talking. Does not seem to work. And you will say too. I mean, obviously, a lot of the way that people talk in the Bible is rather terse or whatever you want to say. However, this is not the way like Abraham talked to that other guy earlier in Genesis, right? He was all like, "Oh, well, if you would do this," like Moses is pretty straight to the point. He's like, "Nope, we can't do this. Yep, nope, we got to do it this way." Again, I'm just finding more evidence for my theory. That's all. He does not seem to go out of his way to try to butter up Pharaoh in the same way that you see some of the other characters in the Bible, is what I'm saying. He's not talking to him like Esther talks to the king. He's not talking to the way, and I'm not saying he shouldn't. I'm just saying that does seem to be his personality. He just comes
Abraham,
out right.
Abraham, you're talking about how he negotiated with God. I don't know where
not negotiating with God, negotiating for the land. Remember, he was very, very nice to that guy who was basically taking advantage of him.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and this is not the same. This does not seem to be the same personality type.
No,
is what I see.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. Not that I'm not criticizing Moses. I'm just saying another person might be like, well, if the Pharaoh would be so kind, but that just does not seem to be his personality based on the difference in the way he's speaking and the way other biblical characters speak with authority figures.
Well, I think that at this point, God wanted that kind of personality.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But it might explain why Moses was rather not thinking this would be a great idea.
Yeah.
Now, moving forward, hold on here. Yeah, so ultimately, Pharaoh seems to kind of agree. He says, "I will send you off myself." And then as soon as that happens, well, of course, Pharaoh reneges on his thing. But it is very similar. It is very typical, right? When like a big leader, they not only agree, but they go like above and beyond. It's like, oh, I'm going to even do it myself, and then that's usually when you should be the most concerned that they're not going to follow up, because like, why does he himself have to do it? Like, that's like overdoing it, right? And so that, I don't know.
What do you?
Because he says, send us off, and Pharaoh said, I myself will send you off. I don't know. I just feel like that's a little bit over the top.
Oh, I see.
I just feel like that's a common thing when people go over the top. It's like, not only will I do it, but I'm going to do it on this level. Is almost when you need to be more nervous if they're not going to follow through on what they have to say. I don't know.
So nothing shall. This is after the disease of the animal.
No, this is before.
Oh, okay. Back in the 8th chapter.
Yeah.
All right. This is after the boils.
Yes. No, that boils are after the livestock.
Yeah. Okay. So this is after the lice.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Because I don't know what you're looking for. You're looking for what I was talking about?
Right. Because I'm not sure that's really.
Hold on. You think that there might be a translation thing going on?
Yeah, it might
there?
be different in translation. Yeah.
Robert Alter has an explanation for why he did it that way.
Oh, okay, all right.
Hold on. No, keep going. He said, and Pharaoh said, "I will let you go that you may sacrifice." And it is a switch.
Yeah. So
Robert Alter says, the desperate Pharaoh now uses a new turn of urgent speak, prefacing the first person imperfect verb with an emphatic Anohi, I myself.
All right, that's how he puts it. All right. It's a little bit...
a little over the top? I think he's getting at something.
Yeah, he's getting at something. Yeah. We'll try to emphasize. In other words, it's an interpretive translation, but he feels it's valid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think, I just think, like I said, that's the kind of a typical approach, is they kind of overcook the pudding a little bit. And that's often a way you know that somebody is not being very genuine. Anyway.
Okay, so
now we're moving to the plague of the livestock, unless you had something else to talk about for that section.
no, I want to talk about the livestock.
All right, talk about the livestock, or I could talk about the livestock while you find your place.
Okay, all right, so this is a disease of the livestock.
Yes.
Right, okay. When I was a little boy, the Haggadah would call this murrain, and it's always struck me as a really refined term for me as a little boy. But talk about animal disease. Like if you see a Haggadah, it'll call this plague murrain.
Mm. Now, Robert Alter has an interesting point about the language here. He says the Hebrew verb here has a spine-tingling effect in which there's no obvious English equivalent. The verb to be in Hebrew is not supposed to have a participle or present tense. At this ominous and supernatural juncture, however, the verbal stand hyh yields an anomalous ho-ya, rendered in this translation as about to be. The strange usage involves a kind of fearsome pun on the divine name YHWH that was mysteriously highlighted in the burning bush episode.
What verse is this talking?
That's my verse 3. I don't know if it's your verse 3. Yes.
Will be on you.
Yeah, behold, the hand of the Lord will be on you. Yeah. He says that is a unusual verb that is kind of in his mind.
Will be on your cattle.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a word play based on God's name there. Yeah, I see.
Yeah. Right. Yep. Now, you were talking before about the extent of things, and maybe perhaps what you're getting at is that this says it'll be against your livestock, your horses, your camels, your sheep, and all the livestock, and then yet somehow Pharaoh has chariots at the end. So obviously it doesn't actually mean not every last one.
Yeah, because later on he says bring them in because of the hail. So that shows.
Well, that's true too, right?
It shows you that some of them were still around,
right? Yeah, because it says, and all the livestock of Egypt died, but the all there could be referring to the types, right? Too, because he says the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the cattle, the sheep. So every type of livestock died. You could use as an all. Yeah, right. It doesn't have to mean every individual livestock.
That's a good point.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because if you say, I have a committee of all the people in America, you might be like, well, I have an African American, an Asian, or something like that. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have 330 million people on your committee. So that's possible. So So again, though, Pharaoh basically says that we can do it, and then he doesn't send them off, so he reneges a second time.
I'd like to mention when they go to a furnace.
Yes.
So, in other words, evidently the kiln where you make the bricks to build these cities and that these slaves are working on, that's used as a way to produce the plague. It's another way of kind of justice being served here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the sort of thing that when you talk about throwing soot in from a kiln and throwing in and that, this almost comes across as the kind of thing that pagan people might do. But again, sometimes we can be overly concerned about such things because they had to get the idea from somewhere, right? And so I'm not suggesting that anybody do this sort of sympathetic sort of ritual in order to get the favor of God. But obviously... But my point is that sometimes when people see these sort of things, they can get very strange about it because they make it out like, well, that would be so distant, but God is particularly asking somebody to do something. So just be careful. Obviously, I don't expect this will happen to you, but imagine that God did approach you in a burning bush and ask you to do this. You'd be like, well, I can't do that. That's pagan. Obviously, that wouldn't be the right response now, right? So let's be a little careful about stuff like that. That's my point.
Now, I wondered about why the beasts had these sores, but of course it would make them unpalatable, for example, for food, for one thing, and then maybe also unable to be used for whatever task they were going to perform,
Yeah, it's not entirely clear what this disease was because it doesn't really specify, but
I was talking about the boils that come later.
Yeah, but that seems to be a result of heat. It seems like it's something that deals with heat, right? So here's something you could think about in terms of what it's getting at. Okay, so it's from the bricks, right? And it says they made them to serve in hard labor. So they're like, essentially it's like, well, you made these people go out of the sun and really slave away for you. And I want you to feel that kind of intense heat on a more, direct sort of way. It seems like it's that sort of attack. Not to mention, of course, the Egyptians did have gods of medicine and things like that as well. But I think for the slave story, this is a direct attack at kind of what they were asking them to do. They were asking them to serve difficult, and obviously in Egypt, that probably implies being out in intense heat for lengthy periods of time and things like that. So it seems like some sort of disease that gives you a burning thing. And when you talk about boils, you just get a sense of heat. And heat rashes and stuff like that. I don't know. Anyway, that's what I get out of it. Okay. And coming from the fire, it just seems like that's what's going on. So. And then let's see what else is there. Yeah. So ultimately, it ends with the question that we're going to ask, right? Because it says, "For by now I could have set forth my hand, and I could have struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been wiped off the face of the earth." So what God is saying is that ultimately, a long time ago, he could have just solved this problem by just wiping them out and just letting the people leave, and yet he did not. So that's obviously a question to ponder, and there's not really a great answer to that, right? Why is it that there was such a delay between Joseph and here, and even within the story, why is it prolonged so long? Why do we need the 10 plagues? Why does it have to be quite so drawn out?
Well, he wanted them to get the point. It took a while till Pharaoh finally yielded, and the people perhaps as a whole, and then also they were so motivated when they finally got him to leave that they were, giving them wealth. They were compensating them for the labor of all those years.
Yeah.
They left with a high hand. They left with a lot
Or
of
if you're optimistic, perhaps joining them in some cases.
In some cases. But here's something very important. The Egyptians did learn a lesson. The Israelites left Egypt, I believe, in 1447 BC. It was not until the 900s that Egypt invaded the Holy Land. For many centuries, during the time of the Judges, when Egypt was strong, Israel was more stable. So they were like an indirect help to the Israelites. So they did learn their lesson. Like we have a saying in America, don't mess with Texas. So the Egyptians learned, don't mess with Israel, at least for quite an extended period of time.
Fair enough. So it did cause a long peace.
They did learn a lesson.
It's kind of like how people talk about the World Wars.
Right.
There was a horrific loss, but on the other hand, we've had a prolonged peace that is rather abnormal.
Germany and Japan have not repeated their behavior since the 1940s.
But just worldwide, the amount of people that we've lost to wars is one of the best periods in human history.
In some ways, you could say,
per cap, yes. It's not even remotely close. Yeah. That we've had this long of a period of time. Because if you look at the recent ones, it's minuscule in comparison to the way it was. And if you look at the way it was before that, you had constantly people conquering and taking over, and then conquering and taking over, and stuff like that. So the stability of the political governments is so there was a price to be paid, but on the other hand, there was something to be acknowledged on the other side of it. So. So essentially you can look at it as, to some extent, punishment does come with consequences on the other side that can be positive. And so it's something to keep in mind, when you're in eras when you feel like perhaps there isn't that direct involvement like you want, or the involvement seems to be negative, that perhaps, there's a better era on the other side. So. But it is a difficult question, obviously. It's something that you have to constantly ask. And to some extent, we are asked to challenge that, too. It says earlier in Exodus, that they cried out, and then finally God listened to them. There is, regardless of however you view God's sovereignty, you have the tale of the persistent widow. We are supposed to do that. That is our framework. We're supposed to feel as if we can affect a difference by being persistent. Even if you believe, well, we can't because we can't make God change his mind. Unfortunately, the Bible does present a narrative framework that we're supposed to essentially kind of think that we can, in a sense, because that's the parable. That's all I have to say is that's the parable, right? So the narrative framework I have to give is that, I do pray your kingdom come, which means I would like it to be faster than whatever God has set in motion.
Yeah.
I just don't have other way to put it. And I know theologically some people might be troubled by that. But again, I'm talking about the narrative framework. I'm not talking about theology. And I'm not trying to play a shell game. I'm using the narrative framework that the Bible's giving me in the exact words of the Bible. So if you have thoughts about that, and I'd love to have a conversation with somebody about that, comment below, and we can talk. Because I think just too often people get into this highfalutin theological thinking and they kind of miss the forest for the trees because, why would you pray your kingdom come if you're supposed to just think everything is so rigid that you can't affect it? What's the purpose? Anyway.
You think of the Jewish example, Lishanaha B'Hab Yerushalayim, talking about the Passover.
Right.
The Seder ends next year in Jerusalem.
Right.
And that 18 centuries.
Yeah, right.
Before it
but that's the right attitude to have, right? Yeah. So it's kind of a nuanced point because in a sense you can't really affect things, but you're supposed to essentially act like you could. It's fascinating. It's a complicated thing. Anyway, so if you enjoyed that little philosophical discussion, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll see you tomorrow.
When I was